Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this exhibition on proposals for 1 Addington Road. My name is Joanna Christofides, and alongside my colleague Sachin Shah, we've been supporting Aitch Group on the communications and engagement strategy for this project. Before we turn to the main presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A, it's probably helpful to run through some of the main aspects of this platform. First of all, please do make sure your volume is up high so you can hear us. You will see on this slide that there is a button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that allows you to view the proposals in full screen if you would like to do so. On this next slide, you will see there is an icon with a question mark, which can be found on the right of your screen, and then just type in your questions, and these will be dealt with in the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Any questions that aren't covered today will be included in a Q&A document that will be circulated in the next few days. Finally, below the question mark icon, there is another icon that will allow you to download this presentation, though we can send copies of the materials on request, so please do get in touch with us later today or tomorrow. Just to introduce the team this evening, there's Luke Cadman from Aitch Group, Peter Heather from Robert Hutson Architects, Jennifer Woods and Nuala Wheatley from Planners Litchfields, Matt Twinborough from Transport Experts Bellamy Roberts, and my colleague Sachin Shah. Thank you once again for attending, and I will now hand you over to Luke from Aitch Group and Peter from Robert Hutson Architects.
Sorry, before we start, Joanna, your screen is not showing at the moment.
There we go.
I do apologise. I do hope everyone can see that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Do you want to go to the? Well, yeah. So let's start on this page. So, as per my little mugshot at the top there, my name's Luke Cadman from Aitch Group. There's a bit there about Aitch Group. We're a London-based developer. We have done quite a lot of successful developments in London and over the years, and as it says here, an expanding part of our business is retirement living. So we've done 2 very well received and successful developments, one in Chobham, which was 14 2-bedroom houses, and the other scheme was a more sort of traditional retirement living scheme of 31 apartments in Loughton in Essex, so right on the High Street in Loughton, which again, two schemes which have been very well received. As I say, we work with Robert Hutson Architects on that particular scheme as well, and we've done a few other projects with them as well. So I'll leave Peter to introduce the practice.
Good evening. I'm, as Luke kindly introduced me, I'm Peter Heather. I'm a partner in Robert Hutson Architects. We're based just outside Chelmsford in Essex, and we have an extensive history going back some, well, 40 years, I suppose, designing residential schemes around the country. We're a member of Acanthus, which is a group of like-minded conservation and design-focused medium-sized practices, again, throughout the country. And we have extensive experience, really, of dealing with design solutions in areas where it's not necessarily straightforward. We're illustrating here a couple of schemes, one in St Albans, which replaced a locally listed building in the centre of St Albans, and another scheme on the right there, which was a Mews development replacing an ambulance station and associated storage facilities in Chelmsford itself. So, as I say, we have a lot of experience in dealing with similar problems and opportunities.
So back to me again. I probably don't need to tell you exactly where the site is. I'm sure you all know probably better than I do exactly where the site is and the wider local area, but it sits obviously on the junction of Sanderstead Hill and Addington Road on the roundabout. Quite a prominent site, it's probably fair to say. And to the north there you can see the Sanderstead Heights building, and then obviously the All Saints Church, and then the park on the other side of the road there. And then as we go further north, so to the left-hand side, you obviously had Woodfields. I think there's a new development happening there as well. So yeah, I'm sure many of you know the site better than I do and the location, but that's where it's currently a 5-bedroom detached house with a separate garage. I think once upon a time it was the old rectory for the church, as I understand it. Yeah, the site's been lived in by sort of guardians for quite a number of years now, both with the previous owner and the site, and then obviously now more recently with us as well. So that's the site. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please? So again, this is just looking at the sort of wider area. This is part of Robert Hutson Architects sort of, an analysis that has been undertaken as part of the looking at the site itself. There's obviously the Gresham Primary School, the parade of shops all the way down to Waitrose down the hill, and then yeah, there's obviously the church and the site in red as well as the listed park opposite as well with the ponds. So, so I'm sure you guys know the area better than I do. On to the next one, please. So yeah, just some images which we took. I think it was probably winter last year actually. And so you can see the trees not necessarily in bloom, but you can see the existing house and how it sits in the context. And obviously the bottom right hand corner image is looking up Sanderstead Hill as well. So as you come up from sort of down towards the station area, so up to the roundabout, and then a view on the bottom left hand side looking across the park as well, so showing the existing house. On to the next one, please. So moving on to the proposals. So I mean the site's got a bit of history to it anyway in terms of previous proposals for redevelopment, but in terms of our sort of interest, we acquired the site last year, and we're proposing a 30 bed retirement living building, which has got 16 2-bedroom apartments and 14 1-bedroom apartments. And the idea is that it's an age-restricted product. So yes, they are traditional 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, but they are built into, if you like, a complex where you have a communal lounge, you have a day manager, you have mobility scooter store and things like that. And you know, things it's a different sort of communal living for people. So the age restriction will be 55 plus, but generally what we found is that people don't make a move to downsize into one of these retirement complexes until they're probably 80 plus. So there is an age restriction on there, and that's what sort of very much separates it from being a traditional kind of standard block of flats, really. And that's obviously what we're trying to create here, a communal living community, really, instead of just a traditional block of flats, really. So yeah, other features that we've got, we have a guest suite. So the idea is that we have visitor parking on site, and if family members are traveling from a distance or whatever, they can stay in the guest suite, which is something that is quite successful on our other developments actually. And then I've mentioned on the top right hand side there, I've mentioned the fact that we have quite a lot of communal facilities, so the residents lounge, there's the day manager's office as well, and we make sure that obviously amenity and sort of landscaping is important to the or intrinsic to the proposals, really. I've mentioned obviously mobility scooters and the landscaping, and then the car parking spaces. So yeah, we have it's amended slightly, but we've got 16 car parking spaces plus 1 guest space. We've got two guest spaces now, I think. So so I think the probably car parking. We've got our transport consultant on, but the car parking provision is generally led through experience. So I'm sure there's a few McCarthy and Stone schemes in the wider area, Purley and just up the road. The parking provision is often led through experience on what provision is needed in these sorts of schemes. As I said earlier, we often find that even though there is an age restriction 55+, we often find that people that move into here are, you know, in their late 70s, 80s, if not older, and obviously become less reliant on cars. And so what we often find is that taxis and mobility scooters, so making sure we can facilitate those sorts of things in the scheme, really, to make sure it's as easy as possible for members to for future residents to get out and about and what have you. So yeah, on to the next slide, please. So here was just a CGI we had drawn up. It's by no means a completely fixed scheme at this stage. We're still adjusting the proposals, but just gives you an idea for sort of the type of thing. So this is the landscape kind of garden space, which in effect does give future residents the ability to move out and move outside into the communal spaces. And on the right hand side there is the main entrance, where those sort of triangular pieces of canopy bit is, and then just beyond that is the day lounge and the day manager's office as well. So the idea is that the scheme here gives you sort of indoors outdoors type communal living, which obviously you don't tend to get in other schemes, but is very important actually in retirement living schemes such as this. Move on to the next slide. So here's an image. So the church, All Saints Church, just behind you. You've got Sanderstead Heights building on the right hand side, and you can just see the roundabouts on the left hand side there, the taxi going round. And this is just an image showing the scheme that we just saw. So these are obviously, as I said earlier, these photos were taken in the winter, so obviously the trees have no leaves on them or anything. So this is a bare-all shot, if you like, of what the proposed building could look like. I think it just gives you an idea for the type of architecture, the sort of how the building would sit in the local area and on the site, and ultimately what it looks like. I think obviously we're not looking at a really modern. I mean, it will be obviously a new building, but it won't be like a modern looking building with, you know, details and materials and things that are would jar with the local area. You know, we've looked at we've done a lot of analysis looking at the local context, the local materials, local architecture, and we're obviously trying to propose something here that sits well with the existing context and the existing architecture. I'm sure Peter from Robert Hutson Architects can talk about that in a bit more detail later. We've got the next image. So yeah, so it's worth, I'm sure many of you will probably be aware of the site history. There's actually been 2 planning applications on the site historically. One was for it's been approved for the change of use of the existing house into flats, and then the building of, I think, 4 houses in the rear of the site, and they're all taking access from Sanderstead Hill. Then the most recent application was by a company called Churchgate Services. They are a care home operator, and they are proposing a 60-bedroom care home. This was refused by the council, not only because the principle of a care home, I don't think that they feel there's not a demand for care home beds, or they've planned for care home beds in the borough, but it was also on the fact it was considered overdevelopment, as it says there in the second sentence. So what we did, we bought the site from Churchgate. We looked at the council's reasons for refusal and what their concerns were, and we've sought to address them in these proposals. So we've reduced the amount of development proposed on the site quite significantly, and then we've also sorry, my son has just burst into the room. Sorry about that. so it wasn't only just, it was refused on the grounds of overdevelopment, but what we've done is we've addressed those particular concerns that were raised by Croydon's planning officers, and looked to reduce the amount and quantum of development. And obviously we're proposing a retirement living scheme now, as opposed to any sort of care home. So yeah, as these three images sort of say, retirement proposals like this, we don't provide any care. They're just purpose-built accommodation for older people, and they allow communal living for later living, later persons really. Later living accommodation is what it's called. So and yeah, there's just some features there. So we often provide showers instead of baths, just to make it easier. A lot wider doors and things like that, which, you know, and it's even things like we have different colour handrails for the walls, for example, so anybody that's, you know, their sight might be going, they can easily see where they are. And it says here in the middle there, the idea is that residents maintain independence. Visitors can come and go as they want to, and as I said earlier, we've got the guest suite, so any visitors can stay over if they need to. And we have the day manager as well present on site. So the idea is that that they're there if you know, if I don't know, a light bulb goes in one of the residents' apartments, just to use an example from one of our other schemes. They're there to help out, or, you know, receive deliveries or book taxis. You know, quite often our day manager might just sort of book a taxi for one of the residents, but generally, yeah, they're there to encourage sort of the still be able to live independent, but just be able to help out as and when they're needed, really. And then yeah, sort of on the right hand side here, so very true actually. Retirement homes like this, they do often provide, yeah, make people a lot happier, we found. And I think particularly in our Loughton scheme, we found a lot of people actually thinking, why did I not make this move sooner? You know, quite often it's the communal aspect that is completely different, that you don't get anywhere else. And I think the idea of, you know, just being able to keep your slippers on and go down to the communal lounge and make a cup of tea and sit there and read the paper, whilst perhaps, you know, your neighbours might pop down and do the same thing. So I think it's that aspect of the development which is completely different to, as I say, either living in a large 3 or 4 bedroom house in the local area, compared to and obviously compared to living in just a general flat apartment scheme. And yeah, I think it definitely does improve people's independence and outlook on life, which is great. So on to the next slide, if that's possible.
What I might do quickly, Luke, because there was a technical hitch at the beginning, is just to encourage more questions. We want more of your questions coming through. Just to remind people how to ask a question, which is the question mark icon on your screen, which you should now be able to see on this slide, which I should have shown earlier, so apologies again. So please do keep your questions coming. You're welcome to ask questions after the event, of course, but we'd love to be able to answer some of the questions this evening. So back to the slides and transport.
Transport, yeah. So yeah, Matt, if you want to come in on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. Yeah, so from a transport point of view, as Luke has alluded to, retirement living schemes don't sort of typically operate in the same way as a traditional residential development, both in terms of the sort of quantum of parking required and also the traffic that it would generate. As we've seen on previous slides, as is the case with most retirement living schemes, they're located close to local amenities, which replaces less reliance on the car, and residents quickly realise that they no longer need a car, and then sort of give it up and rely on sort of walking to the local facilities, or using the scooter, or booking a taxi, sort of if necessary. So as we've sort of shown on that slide there, we've got 17 parking spaces in total, and there's no sort of defined parking standard within the London plan or the Croydon local plan for retirement living. That standard of less than 1 space per unit is for sort of traditional residential schemes. So clearly, as we've sort of talked about previously, the level of parking for such a scheme as this will be below less than 1 space per unit. we've got 17 to serve the scheme. Access, in terms of access, vehicle access will be from Sanderstead Hill. A right turn lane is proposed, and vehicles exiting the site will be restricted to turning left only, to sort of ease the flow of traffic around the proposed access. The access arrangements have been subjected to a road safety audit and have previously been agreed with the Highway Authority when we were involved with the previous care home scheme. With regards to traffic movements, a scheme such as this would generate in the region of sort of 7 extra vehicles during the morning peak hour and about 3 in the evening. Typically, sort of during the peak hours, retirement living schemes don't generate an awful lot of traffic. It tends to be sort of spread more evenly throughout the day, so you don't tend to have those sort of recognised peaks as you would for a residential scheme with everyone going to work. In terms of the internal layout, sufficient space will be provided within the site to allow vehicles to turn, sort of delivery vehicles, refuse vehicles, those sorts of things, so they can enter and exit the site in a forward gear without having to sort of reverse into the site or undertake some sort of 3-point turn and block traffic and that sort of thing. So that's a brief overview of the sort of the highways issues, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Okay. When we looked at the site, we're obviously aware of the planning history and the previous care home refusal. It is, however, an important site, and its corner location is significant. And from those context studies that Luke went through and the photos Luke went through originally, you can see that the importance of the building's contribution to the setting. We obviously, as part of our studies, we did an extensive context analysis, and we looked at issues such as the slope of the land, the existing vegetation, the neighbouring properties, and the general setting of the site. Once undertaken, this study was then used to inform the proposals and will eventually be reflected in a planning application as it comes forward. I think it's true to say that constraints are constraints, though, and some of them are important and so relevant that they have an effect on the building form, which comes through no matter what form of development is proposed for a site. And I think you can see on this slide that some of the issues relating to the former care home were to do with its scale and its bulk, and in a way its sort of monolithic nature. When you viewed the building, this is the top slide here is a sort of section taken along Sanderstead Hill. What we've tried very hard to do in our revised proposals for the retirement living is to break this up and actually produce a development that actually reacts to its setting, reacts to the context of the roundabout, reacts to the land slope and the topography as it goes down Sanderstead Hill, and to actually arrange the building more around a central courtyard. So the building effectively has 2 cores and a central area and a lower height in the linking element between them. We're proposing a building that's no more than 3 stories on the approach to the roundabout area, and the overall height is going to be less than the ridge height of the existing property in this location. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, as I just said, the context of the site is very important, and there's a lot of useful precedent in the immediate vicinity. Although it's not possible to integrate the existing former rectory into the new proposals, that building does have a role in townscape terms, and in our proposal we've incorporated elements from it and materials used within it. And this slide really picks up those points and the palette that's intended to be used as the design moves forward. As Luke said earlier, the design is evolving, and this is not in any way the finished form of it, but it has elements within it that hopefully will be carried through into that final design. Next, please. In working up the proposals, we took note of both the guidance from the local authority and current and emerging guidance in relation to design for the elderly in these particular settings. It's clear from that that a shared sense of community is important to people who live in these buildings. And it's also equally important that they have an element of their own personal privacy and an environment that encourages them to sort of mix and mingle informally. As Luke said, we've designed a scheme here of 30 individual apartments with communal lounge, managers or day managers accommodation, and a guest suite for people to stay overnight. And all this is wrapped around an external amenity courtyard. Because of the age group of the people involved in actually being residents and buying into this building, level access is incredibly important, and to actually be able to access this building easily is also very important. So we've really got two residential accesses here. One from the pedestrian crossing on Sanderstead Hill, which enters the building through the amenity courtyard, and another entrance point using the old vehicular access to the existing property. There's no vehicular access now from Addington Hill, or Addington Road, because Addington Road, sorry, because that is not really a safe access moving forward. So we've got a pedestrian-only access there, which then enables linkage to the pedestrian crossing and across towards the pond and the shops and amenities in that direction. We've designed a scheme of generous internal circulation in this building so that you can travel from your apartment to the communal lounge and thence on out into the amenity courtyard, but also experience some space and some natural sunlight and some areas to sort of stop and mingle with other people, and that sort of important informal interaction that people have said is important in these building types. The extensive mature planting on the northwestern and northeastern boundaries of the site, along with the generous separation distances between the building and adjacent properties, which you can see highlighted on this drawing, means that direct overlooking of existing properties is not really an issue on this development. New buildings are going to comply with the highest standards of thermal efficiency required under the legislation. It's been designed to take advantage of as much natural daylight as possible, but also in a way that doesn't involve serious overheating for the residents within the property, which is a problem that's becoming more and more important as insulation standards go up. Next slide, please. Can we have, this is just the upper floor of what we saw just now, so I don't think I'm necessarily going to linger on that. In our various discussions with the local authority, they were keen to see that the scheme, as it developed on this site, was essentially led by the landscape. And we've worked with our landscape consultants from the initial concept to provide a setting for the building that responds both to the individual constraints of the site, but also the realities of retirement living and the sometimes restricted mobility that brings in later life. Each apartment is going to be provided with its own private external amenity, but at the heart of the scheme and a key part of the arrival sequence is a level and accessible area of shared amenity, taking advantage of the southerly aspect and acting as very much a hub of the scheme. New and extensive planting will provide screening to this area and also in the boundary zone between the building and the roundabout. That really provides continuity with the adjacent buildings and the way that they interact with the public realm, usually with a fairly extensive landscape buffer between them and the pavement, etc. The northern portion of the site, where the slopes are a bit more challenging, will feature wildlife planting and landscaping that can be appreciated more from above than actually from direct interaction with it at ground level, because of the slopes and because of the nature of the people who are likely to be resident here. It's not going to be an area that people are going to want to actually walk out into necessarily. So it's important that it performs other roles visually, and also interacting with potentially the water treatment and management that goes on the site. We sincerely believe that this proposal will serve its residents well and integrate successfully with the setting, and also that it's designed to mature, unlike some buildings that have been built recently, mature over time, both in its landscaping and in the choice of materials proposed. So at that point, I think I'll leave you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So a couple more slides from me, which this time you'll be able to see, I hope. Just to set out what the timeline is. So clearly at the moment we're consulting with stakeholders. We've been speaking to ward councillors and we have been speaking to the Sanderstead Residents Association. Later this summer, there'll be a submission of a planning application to the London Borough of Croydon. And we anticipate around winter 2021 that there'll be a decision made by the council's planning committee with work to start summer 2022 and completion of winter 2023 with the occupation of the building. In terms of feeding back on what you've heard this evening or on the back of the leaflet that was circulated, or and we're very grateful to the Sanderstead Residents Association for circulating that on our behalf. Please come back to us by email. You can give me a call. I've spoken to some of your neighbours already. At the end of this session, before you exit, but when we finish, there'll be a feedback form that you can complete online. And if you would like a paper copy of that feedback form, as well as copies of the materials, we're very happy to send them to you. We'd be very grateful for your replies and your comments by this time next week, so around the 1st of July, please. My contact details are on this slide, as well as my email, so please do get in touch. And now I will turn over to my colleague Sachin for some questions.
Thank you, Joanna. Before I start with the questions, just explain how it's going to work. You can submit your questions, which a number of questions have already been submitted. It may look, there may be a question mark button on your screen to put in questions. If you don't have that, you may also see an arrow, and if you click on that arrow, it'll open up a box where you can put in your questions. I will ask questions on your behalf. I'll try and group them where possible so that similar questions are answered together, so that we can get through as many questions as possible. If we don't get through all the questions, we will provide a written reply to any questions that are not got to, but I hope in the half an hour that we've got that we should be able to get through all the questions. So with that, I'm going to start with a question around transport and parking. So on transport, where do you think the off-site parking needs to will be met? One visitor space is not enough, and local streets, especially Onslow Gardens, are currently often full. So who wants to answer that question?
Matt, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I think, Luke, am I right in saying that it's 2 visitor spaces now?
Yes, yeah, it is. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
we didn't update the presentation in time, but yes, yeah, it's 2 now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky. Parking's always tricky, certainly with these sorts of developments, because we've got retirement living, assisted living, extra care. They're all sorts of developments that have come to the fore, I suppose, fairly recently, and parking standards haven't caught up. A lot of them haven't caught up with these new uses, which is the case in this instance, because the only one we've got to go on is the residential standard in terms of sort of official guidance for the area. So as Luke said earlier, what sort of we tend to do with schemes like this is we work with the developer and look at the level of parking that is typically provided at these sorts of sites, because they're all, in terms of their location, they're all sort of located in broadly the same sorts of areas, sort of residential areas that are close to local amenities. They're not sort of close to public transport, that sort of thing. They're not stuck in the middle of nowhere where residents will be reliant on the car. They're designed, and the sites are chosen specifically because the residents will not rely on the car as much. And in terms of sort of visitor parking, it's sort of based on other similar sites that the developers provided. And in our transport statement, which we'll prepare as sort of as part of the application, we'll have to justify the parking, obviously, and we'll do that by sort of providing information from other sites in similar areas and then sort of justifying it that way. Luke, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add.
I suppose nothing too specifically. I think maybe just to add that, I think you've mentioned it already, that it'll be detailed in your transport assessment, but that people like McCarthy. So we've got quite a few ex-McCarthy and Stone people that work for us, and I think they have huge amounts of experience on hundreds of sites, including in the immediate area. And as part of that, they share their, well, we've been able to get, they share their parking sort of uptake and provision and things like that. And it's interesting to see, obviously people think they need a car parking space, but generally where these sorts of schemes are located, they're within easy reach of a local, local high street, or not necessarily a high street here, but a local parade of shops. And obviously Waitrose just down the hill, which are very easily accessible. And I think when people move into these sorts of proposals in these sorts of locations, they tend to find that their need for a car is much less. And I don't know, maybe just to add that particular comment, really, it's not a traditional residential scheme where people will want to have a car, people will be using their car every day. It's very different sort of proposal, really.
Great, thank you. And staying with parking, we have a question around electric charging points or any electric cars. Will that be available in any of the parking spaces?
Yeah, I can come on to that. Yes, is the very short answer. And in terms of how many, I think the London plan requires, I think it's 20% and then passive provision for the rest. So I think what we often do is we install a few charging points. So in this case, we've got obviously the 17 space where we install charging points in those bays, and then we'll have ducting and cabling in to allow it to allow further bays to be added if there's need or demand for it. So and perhaps I didn't highlight earlier, but we would, as we've done with all of our developments, we would continue managing the scheme moving forward, so and in perpetuity. So if there is a demand, we're able to very quickly accommodate it. So I hope that's answered that question.
Great, thank you for that. And we've just got a couple of questions now around the process for construction. So I'm just going to ask these few questions together. So how will the construction be managed, including issues around dust and noise and water runoff, and ensuring that's all kept within the site? And also, how will construction vehicles, how will they park, where will they park? Are there any rules on which roads they'll drive on?
So I suppose the picking up on the first part of the question, yeah, I mean, there's obviously on construction, there's always going to be dust and noise created. So I think we often use mitigation measures to try and reduce that as much as possible. So for example, I mean, there shouldn't really be too much dusty work, to be honest, but because that's normally it's a demolition that creates that. And there's obviously only a house here, but what we often do is use sort of sprinkler systems and things like that to reduce any dust leaving the site as far as possible. We often put wheel washing facilities in as well, which we've done on numerous sites, particularly where there's immediate neighbours and where your vehicles are discharging straight onto highways. So again, we can utilise all these sort of different things to be able to deal with that. And then on the water runoff, so again, obviously the site, I'm sure you all know, is on a hill. It's a rather steep site as you get to the back. So I think we'll, as part of the scheme anyway, we will be putting in a sort of suds drainage system, and that normally gets put in pretty early on anyway. And we don't often use too much water in the construction anyway, so I'm not expecting there'll be too much runoff from the outset. But in terms of the completed development, we're looking at using, as I said, suds, and we're looking at other ways we can reduce the runoff rates as far as possible. So yeah, we'll detail all of that in the planning submissions.
Thank you. And in terms of any trucks and vehicles coming onto the site, how that be managed to ensure it doesn't impact on traffic flows?
So yeah, in terms of that, I think they'll be using the new, obviously the existing access has to be closed up for the shopper's entrance, but the new access egress will be used. On all of our sites, we always have a banksman whenever the hours of operation are for construction. So council often and environmental health often restrict those hours of operation, so we wouldn't be able to do things on Sundays, for example, and outside of those working hours. But yeah, they would be discharging through the onto Sanderstead Hill, and yeah, controlled by a banksman just to make sure it's safe, etc.
Great, thank you for that. I'm just going to move on to, we've got a couple of questions around the boundary and security of people. So I'm just going to start with one, which is how will you provide a secure boundary to the surrounding properties? There's concern around allow access to the rear gardens of properties surrounding it. How will planting be managed to ensure safety is maintained?
Yeah, well, so I think, yeah, we obviously wouldn't have an open boundary. I think towards the rear, and I think towards on the Sanderstead Heights boundary, I think there is a boundary there at the moment, but I mean, we're happy to have conversations with neighbours and discuss exactly what they want in terms of a boundary, because we will be obviously looking to put one in to make sure it's secure. So yeah, I'm happy to have a conversation about exactly what neighbours would like to see as a boundary treatment. And you know, we've got well hopefully we'll have worksmen on site, so we can facilitate whatever's needed really, but generally it would be a closed boarded fence, you know, 2 meters high, etc., 1.8 meters high. But as I say, we're happy to have a discussion with neighbours directly, and we will, I imagine, in due course, particularly when we do it before we do any works on site.
Great, that's fantastic. So moving on, I mean, just staying on the same broad issue around landscaping and flora and fauna around the site. There's a question around will you be using native species in planting to encourage biodiversity, and will there be bat and bird boxes throughout the site?
Short answer to both questions is yes. So in terms of the native species, I think Croydon often have planning conditions requiring this anyway, but yeah, we always our landscape architect who couldn't join us this evening, but he's always one to push for native species in the detailed specs for when we when we discharge them with the council. And I think we'll likely have green roofs on this proposal as well, and that often uses native species for planting, wildflower seeding and things. So yeah, certainly we look to use native species as much as possible. And obviously there'll be tree planting as well. And so yes, similar situation there. And in terms of boxes for birds and bats and bees and things, yeah, the 3 Bs, birds, bats and bees, we will be providing facilities to make sure that they will be accommodated. I think we've got a few areas where we could do that. I think obviously in terms of birds, obviously there's quite a few trees on the site, which we could certainly put bird boxes there and encourage that, and the same for bats as well. So certainly be accommodating those wherever we can.
Great, and we've seen we've had a response from that saying people are quite happy that the commitment around native species, so that's something that people are happy with. Just moving on now to a question, and perhaps we can widen this out a little bit around climate change and climate emergency, and how the development will help in terms of the wider aims of the council and the country on climate emergency. So the question is, as we move away from methane and gas for heating, will the site be able to utilise ground source heat pumps for heating and cooling? But also, how else is that development going to help in terms of the wider aims of climate change?
Yeah, so I can pick up that again. So I think as Peter's already alluded to, the thermal efficiency of buildings through building control is getting more and more intense, I suppose, is probably the best way of describing it. So they are incredibly efficient now, to the point where actually you sort of struggle with the overheating points, which Peter alluded to earlier. So in terms of the demand for heating, obviously the actual demand is hopefully going to be quite low, but when there is a demand for space heating, we are looking to move away from gas on this site and across all developments actually. And you mentioned, I think, ground source heat pumps. So we've actually got a few schemes of ground source heat pumps, and they do have some issues with them. And so what we're tending to move towards now is air source heat pumps, which is a similar principle. And then they can also provide cooling if need be. So for example, in the communal lounge, for example, we'll probably have cooling in there as well as heating. So yeah, and they will all be obviously electric as well. So no gas is sort of proposed. It does help actually with the scheme, because you don't have to facilitate a gas connection all over the site, and you don't have to worry about that. It's just the electric cables, etc., running. So yeah, it does have other benefits, as well as obviously the most obvious one, moving away from a non-renewable source. So and then we'll also have PVs on site, so we'll have photovoltaic panels and try and maximise that as much as we can, and yeah, looking at those sorts of features really. I hope that's answered the question.
Great. And just there's just a couple of follow-up questions that have come in around building material, and things like concrete is not very great for the environment. So what type of building materials will be used in terms of also looking at the wider aims around environment?
Yeah, so we're at this stage, we're sort of, as I say, the scheme is still moving. Obviously what we've seen here isn't necessarily pretty much there or thereabouts, but there will be some adjustments made to it. But based on where we are, I think we will probably utilize some element of concrete, but I think the main structure will possibly be, we've been looking at timber frame, for example, and CLT is an option. I mean, sometimes that can be an issue with mortgage providers, but yeah, we're certainly having a look at timber frame and seeing if that's going to be feasible on this site. If not, it might be just a traditional sort of brick built on a concrete foundation. So yeah, we're certainly looking at ways of doing it. And I think one of the things that they often talk about is we often have to provide is a whole life cycle carbon analysis, looking at things now and when the development reaches its end as well, and how that affects the environment. So yeah, so hopefully that's helped answer the question. It's by no means fixed at this stage, but like I say, we're certainly looking at ways we can, and we're looking at off-site potentially as well, off-site manufacturing to then bring it on, which just saves a huge amount of time and concrete as well. So I hope that's answered the question. And
Luke, you just mentioned CLT. What is
okay.
CLT?
Cross-laminated timber. Sorry.
Okay.
So a form of timber frame, rather than just being some 4x2 that gets erected. It's sort of the timber is laminated cross grain, which gives it strength. And so yeah, you can use that in building materials.
Yeah, sorry. I think the other thing to sort of mention alongside that is obviously everybody has been very focused on fire issues, and especially for residential apartments, leading from the Grenfell inquiry and the implications that's had. I think that a few years ago, we would have probably had more influence into lightweight timber type construction and cladding materials. I think now that the industry is in the state it's in at the moment, I think there is more possible move towards more traditional, long-lasting, naturally fire-resistant materials. So in this state of flux, I think Luke was saying there are lots of influences, not necessarily those purely to do with climate change at the moment, that are actually pushing the direction of construction methods.
Great, thank you for that. And just Luke, just following up again on one of your last comments around air source heat pumps. There's a concern from someone that might be quite noisy and be noisy for local residents. Can you just comment on how that'll operate?
Yeah, I suppose the answer is, well, they're not. They can make a noise, but they're certainly not noisy. I mean, as part of the submission, we do have to do a noise assessment, and quite often there's a planning condition requiring any plant that's installed to be within a certain number of decibels behind the background noise levels. So, so I think generally speaking, air source heat pumps they don't run incredibly noisy. They will be in an enclosure as well. But yeah, to give further peace of mind, say the council quite often control the levels of any external plant, and obviously we would be using the most energy efficient pumps that are out there at the moment as well. So again, they tend to run a lot quieter than perhaps an old air conditioning unit that you might see on the side of a building or what have you. So yeah, hope that helps answer that question clearly.
Great, thank you. And we've just got a couple of questions that come in back to the groundwork. So has the groundwork been studied, and will the building affect the natural spring which fills the pond? And we've also got another question around the badger. So where's it gone? So it's just split on my screen. Around the badger sets, and have they been checked to make sure it won't be impacted? So on the lower part of the site there are badger sets.
So on the first point, natural spring, to be honest, I don't know. We have done some, well, we have had some groundwork investigations done. I think the previous owner of the site had them done, and we've reviewed those. So I don't know, to be honest. My colleagues in the delivery team tend to review those in detail. So I'm not 100% sure. I guess as we're down the hill, I don't know if that makes a difference.
I would think it's unlikely, Luke, because of the location relative to the pond and the ponds, I think.
It's down the hill, isn't it? Yeah, so I can't think it would do. And the second one was talking about the ecology on site, if you like. So so we've spoken to the previous ecologist, sorry, that did the surveys. I think they were submitted with the previous planning application. The badger sets were found to be vacant the last survey that was done. They had camera traps in and things like that to pick up any movements that happened around those sets. We are obviously going to have those updated. So those are due to take place, I think, in probably the next 2 to 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, so obviously with any planning submission, we'll make sure that we submit that information. The house, I think, was previously, when they did the bat surveys, they found a bat roost there. Obviously it hasn't been touched, and so we're getting an updated bat survey done over the next sort of month or so. And obviously, you know, we'd obviously have to get a license from Natural England before anything happens there. So so yeah, we're certainly making sure that you know, we're not doing anything we're not supposed to be doing. And as I say, the planning application submission will have details, hopefully, of all of the survey work that's been done. Although I think Badger reports have to be kept confidential. I can't remember. The ecologist said something to me about that. But yeah, either way, we'll be submitting information at the planning application stage.
Great, thank you. We have a question around privacy and how in terms of overlooking, and will people from this development be able to see into other properties nearby, or vice versa?
So sorry, say that again, Sachin. Sorry.
So it's a question around whether there'll be any overlooking from the neighbouring properties into the new development, or will people in the new development be able to see into other people's homes nearby?
Oh, I see. Well, Peter, do you want to pick this one up? I think we had a previous slide actually that was quite helpful to show this.
If we can go back to the the one you would, that one, yes. I mean, the council has overlooking guidelines which are much less than the distances involved in this development. We've got something like 43 meters between the back of the building and the back of the adjacent buildings. So the guidance would probably be something in the order of 20-25 meters in similar circumstances. We've limited the amount of balconies and overlooking on that north western boundary, so the opportunity for people to stand at high level and look out is limited. We've got windows, and in the top floor we've literally just got Velux roof lights in the roof plane on that rear boundary. The rest of the issues, the Sanderstead heights, again, we've got something like 35 meters between any opposing windows, again far in excess of the normal guidelines. And largely speaking, it's just blank flanks of the building that are closest to the proposal. The rest of the boundaries are really just public realm, so we've got no real issues with regards to privacy in those locations.
Great, thank you. We've got just only a few minutes left, and I want to get through as many questions as we can in the last few minutes. So I'm just going to quickly just ask a question around, will the road on Sanderstead Hill need to be widened to accommodate the filter lane? People are using 2 lanes approaching the roundabout, travelling up the hill.
The short answer to that is no, it won't be widened. We've got so we use hatching there at the moment that sort of separates the 2 lanes. So we're sort of widening the hatching slightly to accommodate the right turn lane, but there's no sort of physical widening of the sort of the boundaries of Sanderstead Hill at the moment. It's just sort of reconfiguring the lining to fit the middle, the right turn lane in.
Great.
I mean, we'll obviously, just in terms of the highway arrangement, obviously we'll need to agree the specific layout with the council, and you know, given there's obviously pavement works there, you know, if the widening was considered to be required, then obviously we can do that as part of any, or the council would do that as part of any works that we agree with them and ultimately pay for them to do.
Great, thank you. There's a question around boundary trees on Sanderstead Hill, and whether any of those need to be felled.
So we have done some tree clearance works in over the last sort of couple of months, and I think we are looking to retain as many boundary trees as possible, because as you can see from this this image, we obviously need them, but we desire them, if you like, for screening from the road. Ultimately, we don't want to have people in their apartments looking straight out onto the road. So obviously, if it's a desire to have an outlook onto as much greenery as possible, and the same on the where the pedestrian crossing is. Sorry, Peter.
I think also slightly goes back on the previous questioner's point about native species, and quite a lot of the trees existing on the site were effectively overgrown conifers, which really are getting beyond their lifespan and are not really deemed as being native species in this particular location. So I think some of them have been removed where they are, or will be removed where they are towards the end of their life, but they will be replaced with trees that are more sympathetic to the locality.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And the final question is just around process, and just residents just want to understand the work that's happening on site prior to a planning permission being submitted. What is the process, and why is that happening in that order?
So we've done a few bits and pieces on site. I think it's mainly been looking at removing some of the, as I said earlier, some of the trees there and clearing, so we have the ability to, because we need to do archaeological assessments and ground assessments and things like that. But they all won't be taking place yet. So in terms of where we've got to, as I say, we've obviously hoarded the site. We had a few problems with some previous tenants from the care home operator, so we had to try and sort that out. So that's why, one of the main reasons why we've had to do that. But yeah, aside from that, we're not doing any sort of other works on site, apart from just sort of survey works and things like that, which, like I said, in terms of the ecologist, and I think we've got our arboricultural guy going down soon as well. So yeah, aside from those bits and pieces, nothing will be done until we have, well, hopefully have a planning permission, and obviously have discharged all of our planning conditions.
Great, thank you, Luke. I will mention it here and we'll pass it on to you, Luke. There was a request to paint the hoardings, which we'll pass on to you. And then finally, finally, there's just a question for me as Curtin & Co to answer. Just a question about how this was advertised. So we did, as Curtin & Co, we're running this consultation, and we did send a leaflet to properties surrounding the site. We also liaised with the ward councillors to make sure they're aware of it, and whether they could suggest any people to pass it on to. And the Sanderstead Resident Association also put a message on their Facebook group. So that's how we got message out. But if there are any people that would like to know more, you've got the registration details from today, so you can reply to these emails, and on the screen is also phone number and email address. So if you do have any further questions, please do make those. So I will now end, because we're just running over time, to thank everyone for coming. Thank you for giving up one of your evenings to listen to what was happening, to ask all the great questions. Can ask that you stay on your screen. We will end once this presentation ends. If you stay on your computer, a feedback form will pop up. We would appreciate it if you answer and provide the feedback. If you're not able to stay on, you've got our email details, so you can send us any questions and feedback you want. So thank you all. Good evening. Thank you very much.